The last thing my mother said to me was, "I never forgave you," and I hated myself for it. I'm 71 now, and I still remember the way her kitchen smelled that afternoon. Black tea steeping too long, lemon peel on the cutting board, the faint medicinal bite of the ointment she rubbed on her wrists. The windows were cracked open for fresh air, even though the air in Charleston was heavy and wet, the kind that sticks to your skin like a second blouse. Her curtains moved with a tired little flutter, and she kept smoothing the same wrinkle out of her apron as if the fabric could be coaxed into behaving. I had come over with a basket of pears I didn't have room for at home. I told myself it was a normal visit, just me being a good daughter, just a Tuesday. But my chest had that tight warning feeling, the one I get when the past is about to stand up from its chair and speak. My mother, Evelyn, didn't look at the pears. She didn't say thank you. She stared at the kettle like it had offended her, then finally set 2 cups on the table with the careful precision of someone placing fragile glass on a marble floor. "Sit," she said, like I was still 19. I sat. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. What city, what country? And if you've ever loved someone so much you mistook obedience for devotion. Just tap the like button, quietly, the way we do when something hits too close and we don't want to admit it out loud." My mother's hands were thinner than I remembered, the veins raised like little ropes under pale skin. She kept her chin lifted the way she always did, like she was holding something up that the rest of us couldn't see. "I'm going to ask you something," she said. "Okay," I answered, even though my tongue felt dry. She took one slow sip of tea, and her eyes held mine with that same old sternness, the kind that could make a child stand straighter without a single word. "Did you ever know," she asked, "that I didn't choose him for you? I chose him for me." For a moment, everything inside me went quiet. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hush. And then I heard it, the small, soft sound of my own breath catching, like a door sticking in its frame. It's strange, the way a sentence can travel backward through decades and rearrange all the furniture of your memory. Because I spent my whole life believing I was the one who ruined things. I spent my whole life thinking, I let my mother choose my husband, and she never forgave me. But that afternoon, in that cramped little kitchen with the oversteeped tea and the fluttering curtains, I realized there was more underneath. There always had been. And the worst part was, some part of me already knew. I had just been too young to name it. When I was 19, I called my mother's control care. I called her strictness love. I called my own fear respect. That's what girls like me did in those days. Girls who grew up in narrow houses on quiet streets, with polished manners and unspoken rules that sat at the dinner table like another relative. My father died when I was 16. One day he was there, smelling like sawdust and aftershave, humming while he fixed a loose cabinet hinge. The next day he was gone, and the whole house felt like it had been built around an empty space. After that, my mother became the roof. Not warm, not gentle, but solid. She held everything up with sheer force of will, and she expected me to be grateful for the weight of it. She worked at the county office, wore tidy skirts, kept her hair pinned back, and spoke like every sentence had been rehearsed. Even her kindness came with edges. If she hugged you, you felt like you'd been measured. Our evenings were predictable. Dinner at 6. Dishes washed immediately. News on low volume. She'd sit at the table with her bills and her little notebook, clicking her pen, while I pretended to study. The house smelled of starch and lemon cleaner and whatever meat she'd cooked too long because she didn't trust anything pink. "Mary Ann," she'd say without looking up, "you need to understand something." I'd pause, waiting. "A woman's life is decided by small choices," she'd continue. "Who she marries, where she lives, what she tolerates." At 19, I didn't know the difference between wisdom and warning. I was in my first year of community college then. Secretarial courses, bookkeeping, practical things. My friends talked about love like it was a war movie scene. I talked about love like it was a responsibility. And there was a boy. There is always a boy in the story where a girl learns what she is allowed to want. His name was Lucas. He worked at the hardware store near campus and smelled like sun and metal and peppermint gum. He laughed easily, like the world hadn't taught him to be careful yet. He once brought me a soda for no reason at all and said, "You looked like you needed something sweet." I hid that soda can in my bag like it was contraband. Lucas never came inside our house. My mother didn't invite boys in. She barely invited Joy in. But one afternoon, when I came home with my cheeks flushed from walking too fast and my hair frizzing in the humidity, I found her sitting in the living room in her good dress, navy with a modest collar, like she had somewhere important to be. "There's a family coming by," she said. "Who?" I asked, still holding my books. "A respectable family," she replied, as if that explained everything. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and finally looked at me. Really looked at me, with a sharpness I hadn't seen since my father's funeral. "You're 19, she said. "It's time we stop letting life happen to you." My stomach dropped in that slow, sinking way, like stepping off a curb you didn't see. She walked past me, opened the front door, and checked the porch as if she expected someone to appear on command. And then she said the words that made my skin go cold. "I found you a man." I remember the way she said it. "I found you a man," like she'd located a lost glove or a good price on winter coats. Something useful. Something sensible. Something already decided. I didn't sit down right away. I stood there with my books pressed to my chest, the strap of my bag digging into my shoulder, listening to the quiet tick of the clock above the mantel. It had been my father's clock. He used to wind it every Sunday morning, humming low, his breath warm against my hair when he leaned over me to reach the keyhole. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though some part of me already understood. She turned from the door and faced me fully then. Her mouth was set in that thin, determined line I knew well, the one that meant the conversation was already over, and we were just going through the motions. "I mean," she said, "that I've met someone suitable. His name is Robert. He works for the shipping company down by the harbor. Steady job. Good family. Church going." She said each word carefully, like she was placing stones to build a wall. I waited for her to ask me something. To ask if I was seeing anyone. To ask what I wanted. She didn't. "And," she continued, "he's interested in you." The word interested landed between us like something fragile. I remember nodding, not because I agreed, but because nodding was what I'd learned to do when my mother spoke in that tone. It kept things calm. It kept her from sighing the way she did when she thought I was being difficult. "I'm in school," I said quietly. "You can finish," she replied. "Plenty of women finish school after they're married." I thought of Lucas then. The way he leaned against the counter at the hardware store, sleeves rolled up, forearms strong and careless. The way he listened when I talked, really listened, like my thoughts weren't inconveniences. "I already know someone," I said. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and immediate. "Know someone how?" The room felt smaller. The walls seemed closer, like they were leaning in to hear my answer. "I mean, there's a boy," I said. "A man. Lucas." She didn't ask his last name. She didn't ask where he worked. "Does he have plans?" she asked instead. "I think so." "Does he have prospects?" "I don't know," I admitted. She exhaled through her nose, a small, controlled sound that meant disappointment wrapped in patience. "Mary Ann," she said, using my full name the way she did when she wanted authority, "affection is not a plan." I can still see her then, standing in that living room with the afternoon light hitting her just right, making her look taller, stronger, like someone who knew exactly how the world worked and was tired of pretending otherwise. "I raised you better than to gamble your life on a feeling," she said. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it turned and turned, pushing warm air around the room. I tried to imagine my future the way my mother saw it. Neat, orderly, predictable. I tried to imagine a man named Robert, with his steady job and his respectable family, sitting at our table. I couldn't see his face. Just a shape. A placeholder. The next Sunday, Robert came for dinner. My mother cooked a roast she'd been saving for a special occasion. The house smelled rich and heavy, like expectation. I wore a blue dress I hadn't chosen. She'd laid it out on my bed that morning, pressed and ready. Robert was polite. He shook my hand firmly. He called my mother Mrs. Collins and looked at her with unmistakable admiration. Not romantic admiration. Something closer to approval. Like he was impressed by her. During dinner, he spoke about shipping routes and schedules and how he believed in doing things the right way. He asked me a few questions, where I studied what I hoped to do, but his eyes kept flicking back to my mother, as if she were the real audience. "You've done a fine job raising her," he told her. My mother smiled then. A real smile. Soft. Proud. Something inside me tightened. After he left, she washed the dishes with more energy than usual, humming quietly. "He's serious," she said. "That's rare in a man his age." I said yes a week later. Not out loud, not in some dramatic declaration. I said it the way girls like me learned to say things that mattered. Quietly, with my eyes down, with a belief that compliance might one day turn into peace. My mother cried when I told her. Real tears. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and looked at me like I'd finally done something right. "You'll thank me someday," she said. I nodded, because that's what gratitude looked like in our house. I never told Lucas in person. I wrote him a letter instead, the kind with careful handwriting and too many apologies. I said it wasn't his fault. I said I needed stability. I said words that sounded grown-up but felt borrowed. He didn't write back. The engagement passed like a formal event I hadn't planned but was expected to host. My mother handled most of it. Guest lists, colors, dates. I showed up when told, smiled when prompted, tried to believe that numbness was just another word for maturity. Robert was kind in his way. He never raised his voice. He never drank too much. He never forgot an anniversary. But he also never asked questions that didn't have practical answers. He treated affection like a routine, something to be maintained, not explored. On our wedding night, when he kissed me, it felt like sealing an agreement. We moved into a small house near the harbor. It smelled like salt and old wood. The foghorns woke me at night, long, low cries that sounded like warnings. I learned quickly how to be a good wife. I kept the house clean. I cooked meals that lasted 2 days. I listened when he talked about work. I stopped talking about the things he didn't ask about. My mother visited often. She'd inspect the corners, the cupboards, the way I set the table. Robert would pour her tea and listen respectfully while she offered advice I hadn't requested. "You see," she'd tell me later, "this is what security looks like." But something else was growing inside me. Not rebellion. Not rage. Resentment. It started small. In the way Robert corrected me when I spoke too freely. In the way my mother praised him for things she'd once criticized my father for. In the way decisions about my life still seemed to pass over my head, landing somewhere between them. When I became pregnant at 21, my mother clasped my hands and said, "Now it all makes sense." I smiled for her. I learned to smile for everyone. Motherhood gave me purpose, but it didn't give me voice. I loved my children fiercely, 2 of them, a boy and a girl, but even then, I felt like I was playing a role someone else had written. Robert and I grew polite with each other, comfortable, distant. My mother, though, she grew sharper. If I complained, even gently, she'd stiffen. "This is what you chose," she'd say. I never reminded her whose choice it had really been. Years passed like pages turning without being read. I went back to school part-time. I worked. I aged. My mother aged too, but she never softened. If anything, she became more convinced that my life was a reflection of her success, or her failure. The first time I suggested I might have wanted something different, she went quiet. "I sacrificed everything for you," she said. The words settled over me like a debt I could never repay. And so I stayed. In the marriage. In the role. In the silence. Until one evening, decades later, after my children were grown and my marriage had settled into a careful truce, my mother said something she'd never said before. "I thought you'd be happier," she admitted. The admission startled me more than any accusation ever had. And that was when I began to understand that forgiveness, hers or mine, had never really been the point. That admission, "I thought you'd be happier," sat between us like an unfamiliar object neither of us knew how to touch. We were in her living room then, years later, the furniture rearranged to make room for age. A recliner replaced the old sofa. A small table held her medications, lined up like soldiers. The curtains were thinner, letting in more light than she once allowed. She had softened in the ways bodies do when time insists, but her voice still carried that same careful authority. "I am happy," I said automatically. She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I noticed the doubt in her eyes. Not about me, about herself. "You sound like me," she said. That was the beginning of it. Not a revelation, not a confrontation, just a quiet crack. After that day, memories began surfacing in strange ways. Not all at once. Just little things. A phrase she'd used too often. A look she'd given Robert that felt too knowing. The way she talked about security as if it were a language she'd learned the hard way. I started noticing how often she said I couldn't when she talked about her own youth. I couldn't leave. I couldn't choose. I couldn't risk it. One afternoon, while helping her sort through old papers, insurance documents, brittle envelopes, faded receipts, I found a photograph tucked inside a book. It wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. She was young in it. Younger than I'd ever seen her. Laughing. Truly laughing. Her hair was loose, her head tilted toward a man I didn't recognize. His hand rested on her back. Familiar, easy. My chest tightened. "Who is this?" I asked, holding it out. She froze. Time did that thing it sometimes does. Stretched thin, humming quietly. She took the photo with trembling fingers and sat down heavily. "That," she said, "is someone I loved." The room felt suddenly smaller. "What happened?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the photograph, tracing it like a map she'd memorized. "I didn't choose him," she said finally. "My mother didn't approve. He didn't have prospects." The words landed with a dull, echoing thud. "And your father?" I asked. "He was safe," she replied. He was good. He was what was expected. I sat across from her, the weight of the years pressing in. And Robert? I asked, before I could stop myself. Her jaw tightened. He reminded me of him, she said. Of what I thought I should have chosen the first time. It was like the floor shifted under my feet. All those years. All that certainty. All that blame. You chose him because of you, I said quietly. She flinched. I chose him because I didn't want you to suffer, she said quickly. But you also chose him because you never forgave yourself, I replied. Silence. If you're still with me, let me ask you something. Have you ever lived out someone else's unfinished story? Have you ever been handed a life that wasn't really yours to begin with? You can answer in the comments, or just sit with it. I know not every question needs an audience. Her eyes filled then, not with anger, not with defense, but with something that looked like grief. I thought, she said, voice shaking, that if you lived the life I didn't, it would make mine make sense. The room smelled like dust and old paper and something bitter I couldn't name. And when I wasn't happy? I asked. She swallowed. I thought you were ungrateful. That was the betrayal. Not Robert. Not the marriage. The betrayal was realizing that my obedience hadn't been love, it had been labor. I had been carrying her regret like an inheritance I never agreed to accept. I spent years thinking you hated me, I said. Her face crumpled. I hated myself, she whispered. And it was easier to put it on you. There it was. Not cruelty. Not evil. Fear. Regret. A woman who never learned how to set her burdens down. We sat there a long time. No shouting. No dramatic apologies. Just the sound of the clock ticking and the distant hum of traffic outside. I never forgave you, she said again, softer now. Because forgiving you meant admitting I was wrong. And now? I asked. She reached for my hand. Her grip was weak but intentional. Now I know I failed you, she said. And I don't know how to fix it. I squeezed her hand back, feeling the strange mixture of relief and sorrow settle into my bones. You don't fix it, I said. You tell the truth. She nodded slowly, tears slipping free. And for the first time in my life, I felt something loosen inside me. The truth didn't arrive like a cure. It arrived like a weight being shifted, still heavy, but no longer crushing the same place. After that afternoon, my mother changed in small, almost imperceptible ways. She stopped correcting me mid-sentence. She asked questions and waited for the answers. When she spoke about the past, she no longer used should have like a shield. I didn't suddenly become free either. Freedom, I learned, is not a door you walk through. It's a series of quiet refusals. The first refusal came when Robert asked me, politely as always, why I seemed distant. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same one we'd eaten at for decades. The wood was worn smooth where my arms rested. The window over the sink looked out onto a narrow strip of yard I'd never bothered to plant. I've been thinking, I said. He nodded, waiting. I don't want to keep living the way we've been living, I continued. Careful. Silent. He frowned slightly. We're stable. I know, I said. But I'm not invisible anymore. That startled him. I could see it in his eyes. I didn't know you felt invisible, he said. That's part of the problem, I replied gently. We didn't divorce. That surprises people when I tell them. But we changed. Or rather, I changed, and he had to decide whether he could live with that. I stopped asking permission for small things. I went back to school full-time, finished what I'd started. I took a job that didn't impress my mother or fit neatly into her idea of success, but it felt like mine. When my mother questioned my choices, I didn't explain myself. I simply said, "This is what I'm doing." She learned slowly to sit with that. One evening, she came over for dinner. I cooked something simple. We ate without ceremony. "I wish," she said suddenly, "that someone had told me I was allowed to disappoint my mother." I looked at her across the table, at this woman who had been a force of nature my entire life. "You are," I said. "Even now." She smiled sadly. "It's late to learn." "Late isn't the same as never," I replied. In the months that followed, we talked more than we ever had. Not every conversation was easy. Some ended in silence. Some ended in tears. But none ended in lies. She told me about the man in the photograph. About the night she chose differently. About the resentment she carried like a stone in her pocket. "I thought control was love," she said once. "So did I answered. Forgiveness didn't come as a single moment. It came in pieces. In the way she stopped speaking for me. In the way I stopped shrinking. In the way we both learned that regret doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. When she grew weaker, I sat with her more often. We watched old television shows. We shared fruit in the afternoons. Sometimes we talked about nothing at all. One day she took my hand and said, "I need you to know something." I waited. "If I could go back," she said, "I would let you choose, even if you chose wrong." I squeezed her hand, feeling the years between us soften. "I didn't choose wrong," I said. "I just didn't choose freely." She nodded. "That matters." After she passed, I found the photograph again. This time, I didn't feel anger. I felt understanding. Two women. Two generations. The same fear, carried differently. Now, when I look back at that 19-year-old girl, standing in her bedroom with her books pressed to her chest, I don't judge her. She was doing what she thought love required. If you're listening to this and you're young, really listen to me now. Love does not demand obedience. Love does not ask you to disappear so someone else can feel whole. And if you're older like me, carrying choices you can't undo, know this: it is never too late to tell the truth. Even quietly. Even imperfectly. I spent years believing my mother never forgave me. Now I understand. She was asking me to forgive her. These days, when the house is quiet and the afternoon light settles just right on the walls, I think about how easily a life can be mistaken for a duty. I still live in Charleston. I still wake early. I still drink my tea a little too strong. But I no longer confuse peace with silence. I no longer believe that being chosen is the same thing as being loved. When people ask me if I regret my marriage, I tell them the truth. Not the simple version, not the bitter one. I tell them that regret is complicated. That some choices shape you even when they weren't fully yours. That survival and happiness don't always arrive together, but sometimes they meet later, when you finally stop pretending. My mother's voice still visits me sometimes. Not the sharp one, not the commanding one. The quieter one she found at the end. The one that finally said, "I was wrong." I've learned that forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past. It just loosens its grip. It gives you room to breathe in the present. If you're watching this and you've ever felt responsible for carrying someone else's disappointment, you don't have to keep holding it. You can set it down. Even gently. Even now. And if this story stirred something in you, consider subscribing. These are the stories we carry quietly, and sometimes, telling them is how we finally put them to rest. So let me leave you with this. From one woman who took far too long to ask it. If you could speak to your younger self, before the choices hardened into habits, what would you tell her to choose for herself?